"You've never had it so good" was the slogan for the early 1960s. It was perhaps the start of the affluent society, with recovery after the war well underway. There were many changes in the decades of the 60s and 70s. Many cherished things and places disappeared forever. Our way of life would never be the same again. In 1897, they built a tower in New Brighton, higher than Blackpool's tower. For New Brighton had by then become a well-established holiday destination. But after neglect in the First World War, it was demolished between 1919 and 1920. But still, even as late as the 1960s, New Brighton was still a vibrant place for days out. Miss New Brighton was well established as good fun for the spectators, but deadly serious for the competitors. The open-air pool was the venue and would continue throughout the 2 decades. In 1964, the event attracted local and national celebrities to the judging panel. For most of the summer, the pool was not just a good outdoor watering place for all to enjoy, but also a good venue for special events. The beach was largely for the kids, with the sand pies and obligatory donkey ride. The pier was the new place to dance with the new rock and roll sound. But maybe you prefer to listen and relax to the band in Vale Park, or enjoy Mr. Punch for all of you young at heart. It's time for makeup at the old New Brighton Floor Pavilion. In those days, it was a time of Jackson Earl and Melanie Inn. But in those days, people thought that this would go on forever as an essential part of the summer season. Well, these pictures show what it was like at the bottom of Victoria Road, just alongside the pier. and you can see how busy that it was. The Tower Ground Fairground was always a popular attraction with its outdoor rides and its dancing. That is, until the tower was no more. It was completely destroyed by fire, but by 1969 the Tower Ballroom and the grounds were gone forever. This was a nail in the coffin for the New Brighton area. All around the Tower Grounds and Victoria Road, neglect set in. The Tivoli Theatre was closed and the cafes were boarded up. The Wirral ferries stopped calling in 1971 and the pier was demolished in 73. The promenade pier followed in 1978 with a prolonged effort to preserve it, and even the sand disappeared. Let's turn our attention to one of the other beaches of the Wirral, West Kirby. The beach is as crowded as ever, and most people would have arrived by electric train at West Kirby Station, some by bicycle. At this time in the century, cars were somewhat of a luxury. Behind the boats is the West Kirby Hydro Hotel. Shortly to be demolished, but a gent couldn't take afternoon tea there unless he was wearing a tie. The beach was also a place to enjoy those fresh westerly breezes, and for horses to take a gallop. This is a distant view of West Kirby, but this leads us to take another look at the Wirral and some of its other quaint places. Peaceful and tranquil, with St Mary's Church in Port Sunlight Village, another peaceful haven yet so close to industry. It was established in 1888 by William Lever for his employees. The footpath leads to Williston Mill, which lost its sails many years before. At Bidston, the sails still stand proud on the skyline. The lanes are quiet around Brackenwood. At Spittal Crossroads, no traffic lights are here yet, but the Birkenhead Bus Corporation's number 58 is taking the road to Clatterbridge. It was a fairly quiet corner. Woodside was the terminus for most Birkenhead buses as they connected with the ferry to Liverpool at 10-minute intervals. Birkenhead shopping centre as it was in the 1960s. The Co-op supermarket, a newish idea that took over from the old Roxy cinema. The prices were in old money, but at values you can hardly remember. This time was the start of the affluent society. At Fair's camera shop on Dacre Hill, the cine camera was in great demand. Coates opposite Bebington Station. It was the era of the twin tub washing machine. They could be bought on HP over 2 years, subject to you not needing a loan of course. There were no credit cards, and apart from the odd HP deal, you had to live within your means, and few people had bank accounts. Birkenhead Market, built in 1845, was 125 years old in 1970, partially destroyed by fire in 1974 and closed in 1977 when it moved to the new Grange Road precinct. Remember your daily pinter from Swan Hill Co-op Dairy? Now the site of a car showroom, it provided most Wirral people with their milk. Bulk milk tankers came in at one end and the milk was processed and tested and would reach your home by the next morning in time for breakfast. You paid for your milk in advance by buying tokens at the local co-op shop. In those days, the local co-op society affected most people's lives, from the cradle to grave. The early 1960s saw the partial introduction of diesel trains on local services. They gradually replaced the steam train. This scene is at Port Sunlight. At Williston, Hadlow Road Station, passenger services ceased in 1956, but goods traffic carried on until the early 1960s, when the line between Houghton and West Kirby closed. Rail tracks were still in use at Birkenhead Docks, where a lot of the traffic was still rail-based on its extensive rail system. Appleby Tug entering the Mersey after a refit as a result of its second sinking. Built in 1951, it sank in Canning Dock in 1954. In 1960, it was sunk with a loss of 7 lives after moving from Holyhead in 1970. She ended her days in Greece. On Sunday the 25th of October 1970, Spiller's Flour Mill on the dockside, it was all hands to the pumps for the emergency services to prevent the fire to nearby mills. The next day, a burnt-out shell was all that was left. Still on the docks, road traffic was increasing and worked alongside and amongst the dock railway. Birkenhead Docker Number 4 was organised by the Wirral Circle and operated a rare passenger service around the dock system using open goods wagons to carry enthusiastic passengers. Locomotive Lucy was driven by Derek Foster. It was the last steam locomotive to work in Birkenhead Docks. It was built in 1909 and ran up until 1970. Eventually taken over by the Liverpool Locomotive Preservation Group. It came back to Birkenhead Docks in 1972. Now, what would health and safety executives say about a trip like this today, even if it was still possible? Because the dock railway is no more, except for a link to Rock Ferry to allow a possible reopening. The world's first scheduled hovercraft service linked Morton and Rail in 1962, and it was operated by British United Airways. It also carried mail. It was only experimental and it only lasted for 1 season. Wouldn't it be useful today as a shortcut to the North Wales coast, leaving the traffic jams behind? We now take a bird's eye view of the docks in the 1960s. At Rock Ferry's oil terminal, BP's tanker British Argosy discharges its cargo. She later moves to Cameleers for an overhaul. In the late 60s and early 70s, Lairds were involved in a supply of naval destroyers to the Chilean and Venezuelan army. Here, Norman Cave, managing director of the repair company at the time, officially hands over the Nuevo Espirito to the Venezuelan Navy. Many Venezuelan naval personnel had been on site during the work, and some had even married local girls. Royal Daffodil and Rural Irish of Wallasey Corporation ferries provided the most of the pleasure cruises on the Mersey. Together with the Birkenhead ferries, they were taken over by the Merseyside Passenger Transport Executive, which formed in 1969. Now let's join the Birkenhead ferry to Liverpool, and we pass the BP tanker under repair and set sail to Liverpool. The autumn of 1969 saw the last steam-hauled summer's iron ore train from Bidston Dock to Shotton, here with John Summers on the footplate. With the rationalisation of steel production in the UK, Bidston Dock terminal eventually closed and the dockside equipment demolished. After steam, two Class 25 diesels were needed to provide power to take on a full load to Shotton. In the early to mid 1960s, steam was frequently used on the main Birkenhead to Chester line for goods traffic and long distance passenger traffic. Port Sunlight provides a grandstand viewpoint in about 62. The last steam train at Birkenhead Woodside was in 1967. And later the same year the station closed. Here an excursion train departs for Southampton. Steam on the Dee coast near Thurciston, but by the mid-60s the old West Kirby station serving the line was looking a bit derelict. The track eventually became the Wirral Country Park and the Wirral Way as we know it today. view taken from the top of the coaling plant of Mollington Street motive-powered depot. Steam had ended. Blaster Bates proposed to demolish the culling plant used to load coal into tenders, and it was needed no more. It was the end of an era. By 1968, central Birkenhead suffered severe traffic congestion as the Birkenhead Tunnel was straining under the movement of 19 million vehicles, the largest number ever. But Birkenhead Corporation took the bull by the horns and in the process changed the face of the town out of all recognition. Flyovers were created to separate town centre traffic from the tunnel traffic, and this would now be herded into large marshalling areas designed to contain the congestion and feed the toll booths in an orderly manner to provide these stacking lanes. To provide this, stacking lanes had to be cleared and services diverted from a wide area of the town. While all this was taking place, the Mersey Tunnels Joint Committee had come down in favour of a second Mersey Tunnel, which would link Liverpool to Wallasey. Sponsored by the Liverpool, Birkenhead and Wallasey corporations, it would cure congestion and allow for future traffic growth. The road would connect to a new mid-Wirral motorway, the M53, at Bidston Moss, providing direct access to the national motorway network. The new approach roads made use of the now closed Wallasey to North Wales railway cutting, where it passed through these sites of the old Poulton and Seacombe station. And these roads, in parts totaling 10 lanes, allowed both motorway and local traffic access to the new tunnel. Breakthrough on the first tube took place at the Liverpool end on the 1st of March 1970, before the official opening ceremony. The tradition established in 1933 and 34, the public was given the chance to walk through the new tunnel in return for a payment to be donated to charity. This was a one-way walk, and at the end, buses took walkers to the ferry for a river crossing return. On the 27th of June 71, Queen Elizabeth II arrived in Wallasey for the opening ceremony. After naming the tunnel the Kingsway to complement the title bestowed by her grandfather on the Birkenhead Tunnel, the Queen travelled through to an equally enthusiastic welcome in Wallasey. Home of the first World Scouts Jamboree in 1929, Arrow Park has been a public park ever since. And since 1928, it was bought by the Birkenhead Corporation from the second Lord Leverhulme the year before. Built in 1856, this picturesque lodge was the home of the head gardener, and in park days home of the park foreman. In the late 60s, the golf course was renowned as one of the finest municipal courses in the country, and it was maintained by the Parks and Gardens Department based in the park. The first tee needed reconstruction. On completion, the Mayor of Birkenhead, Alderman James Crosby, teed off in a match against Wallasey Corporation. His first shot was an embarrassing air shot. The roundabouts, now gone, at Arrow Park Gates, the centre of the major road junction, were always kept in immaculate condition by the Parks and Gardens Department. Tulips and wallflowers make a colourful display. The roundabout at Ford Hill was a mass of Darwin hybrid tulips and spring flowers. Upton Village Junction, another busy traffic spot at the edge of the shopping area, was also made into a colourful, restful corner. The greenhouses and nursery area have long gone, but here care and skill were put to the test as blooms would grow into perfection to provide a galaxy of colour for civic functions. Tommy Stanley, seen here, became head gardener in 1933 and worked at Arrow Park for 50 years. On Sunday, the 16th of May 76, the circus came to Birkenhead. As part of their 200th anniversary tour, the troupe of 8 performing elephants maintained circuit tradition by parading through the streets. And now a look at the tranquil Raby Mere as it was in the 1960s. There was a public boating on the lake, and nearby there was a little cafe with old-fashioned swing boats and penny in the slot machines. In 1976, before the long hot summer, the coast at Mells took a battering by high seas. Both summers of 75 and 76 were long and hot, and people made the most of the beach at Hoylake. The open-air pool was taken over by the local people after attempts were made to close it by the local authority. Eventually, all pools like this were closed. In the same year, the fire brigade tackled many a heath or woodland fire. And this is the plague of ladybirds that descended like a red carpet. You walked on them, drove on them, and the fences were covered with them. Still in 1976, the emergence of the wreck of the old boat contrasts with the launch of the new Hoylake lifeboat. The Abbeyfield Garden Party at Hilborough House was opened by the Duchess of Westminster and attended by Sir Selwyn Lloyd and other well-known figures. The TV show It's a Knockout came to New Brighton in the 70s. It was hosted by well-known personalities including Eddie Waring and Katie Boyle. It took place at the old open-air pool. The competitors were New Brighton versus Blackpool. By contrast, we move to the very severe winter of 62 to 63. When did you last see the ice floes in the River Mersey? But throughout this, the ferries carried on. Central Park in Wallasey. Ashton Park, West Kirby. Overall, the freeze-up lasted for about 3 months, from Boxing Day 62. Peel's newsagent at 79 Poulton Road, Wallasey in the late 60s, when local children paid a visit dressed in their Sunday best. Local streets in the vicinity made good play areas. Compared to today, something is missing though. Hardly any cars, and the children had freedom to play at will. The 60s brought the high-rise blocks of flats, but by the 70s some had deteriorated so badly that Wirral Council decided to demolish the worst. Oak and Audley Gardens had to go even before they were fully paid for. Preparations were made for their demolition. The local schools and houses had to be protected from possible debris. Finally, on Sunday the 30th September 79, demolition day arrived. Audience of thousands. Bang! And they were gone. Birkenhead Fire Brigade. Their headquarters at the junction of Whetstone Lane and Borough Road, roughly where Farm Foods is today. Drill and practice took place here and the surrounding station. Some of the firemen and families lived there, ready for any emergency. Alongside the full-time brigade was the auxiliary fire service. Dating from wartime, the Bebington service was located near Town Lane. Here they are in the competition with other areas. Auxiliary services wound up in 1968, and here are those in Wallasey are on their final parade. The 1970 was a year of change on the buses. A newly formed passenger transport executive took over both Birkenhead and Wallasey undertakings. Liveries become a mixture of both Birkenhead blue and Wallasey cream. At the time of the changeover, there's a mixture of liveries at Woodside and Seacombe terminals. Up to the mid-70s, there was a dark and dingy terminus for the rural lines at Mersey at Liverpool Central Underground Station, when it was closed for the construction of the Underground Loop line at Central in Liverpool. Merseysiders on the move was the slogan, and the line reopened in 1977. The first Wirral train entered the loop system at 6:05 in the morning. Many rural trains at that time were 40 years old, dating from 1937, when the lines from West Kirby and New Brighton were electrified. Some of the new underground stations opened a few weeks later, and it was to be the heart of a new region-wide rapid transit system.